You think men are hard to read? Wrong. A man can hide his words, he can fake his cool, but the moment a woman touches him in the right place, his desire betrays him every time. And here's the secret: when it's an older woman who does it, he's not just turned on, he's captivated, because she knows exactly what she's doing. Today I'm going to reveal 7 places where a simple touch makes it impossible for him to hide his feelings. But let me ask you this: have you ever noticed how a man stiffens, or leans in closer, or suddenly can't look away after a casual touch? That's not random, that's his body exposing him. And once you know these spots, you'll never look at touch the same way again. So pay close attention, because once you master this, you won't need to chase. He'll chase you. Before I share the rest, if you're enjoying this, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Which of these touches do you think men can resist? Spoiler, none of them. He froze just for a second and then he melted into her touch. Have you ever laid a hand on someone and felt them finally let out a breath they didn't even know they were holding? Like years of silence and waiting suddenly broke free in that single moment. There is something different in the way a woman touches when she has lived through heartbreak, through quiet nights, and through the slow, unseen work of rebuilding herself, piece by piece. It isn't about youth. It isn't about trying to tempt or seduce. It is about being present, about timing, about knowing what matters. Yet the world rarely ever speaks about that kind of power, especially when it belongs to a woman over 40, 50, or 60. They tell you your beauty fades, that your touch loses its meaning. They couldn't be more mistaken. If you've ever questioned whether your touch still carries weight, this is meant for you. What follows will show you the 7 places where a man cannot hide his desire when touched by a woman who truly knows herself. Not to control him, not to win him, but to remind both him and you of something genuine. So, if you have ever felt invisible, if you've ever doubted your pull, stay with me. And if this reaches something inside of you, go ahead and like, subscribe, or better still, leave me a comment. Tell me, have you ever touched someone and felt the shift inside them? The back of the neck holds more than people realize. It is quiet, often ignored, but when touched in just the right way, something changes. It is where tension hides, where a man tries to keep himself composed, where he wears the mask of being fine. But it is also the very place where that mask begins to slip, if you know when and how to reach for it. The neck is more than skin and bone. It is the bridge between mind and heart. It is where instinct collides with softness, and when you place your hand there gently, you're not only touching his body, you're speaking without words, telling him he can let go, that he doesn't need to pretend, that someone can see him clearly even in silence. Claire, 56, once told me about walking with someone new. They strolled by the beach, the sky dim, the air still. Almost without thinking, she lifted her hand and let her fingers rest softly on the back of his neck while he looked out at the sea. He didn't speak, but he stopped moving. His breath caught in his chest, and then he turned toward her, not with shock, but with something else, like he had been discovered. He didn't smile right away, but his eyes shifted, growing gentler, warmer, like for the first time he wasn't being measured but simply seen. And for a small moment the weight he carried seemed to fall away. That kind of touch doesn't demand attention. It doesn't ask for anything, but it says everything. It says, I know you're tired. You don't have to carry it all right now. You can rest with me. Sometimes the quietest touch in the simplest place is the one that cuts the deepest, not because it was planned, but because it was true. And when it is true, he feels it even if he never speaks it. The inside of a wrist holds its own kind of story. There's a softer intimacy in that part of a man's body. The skin is thinner, the pulse beats closer. It is one of those few places where the body whispers instead of shouting. Men don't often show that part of themselves, not unless they feel safe. A closed fist, arms folded, hands buried in pockets. These are the ways they guard it. But when a man lays his wrist open, palm facing up, It's more than comfort. It's a sign, a small opening that says, I don't have to shield myself right now. Luisa, 61, told me something that stayed with me. She had just lost her brother. The funeral was heavy, filled with silences where words couldn't reach. Her husband had been distant for months, both of them walking around each other like shadows. But at the reception, she reached for his hand. She didn't squeeze it. She didn't speak. She just held it, resting her thumb gently on the inside of his wrist. At first he stayed still, but then it happened. His breathing shifted, his fingers softened, and when he finally looked at her, for the first time in weeks she saw gentleness instead of pressure. She didn't fix their problems that day, but she touched something real inside him, something buried. That's what the wrist holds, not power, not control, but access. When you touch him there, not to direct, not to grip, but just to be with him, he feels it. Maybe he won't notice in his mind, but his body notices. His heart beats differently, stronger, even if he won't admit it. Sometimes the most powerful action is simply saying, I'm here, I see you, I don't need anything more, and often that's all he's been waiting to hear. The lower back carries instinct. A touch there is simple, often unnoticed by others, but deeply felt by the one receiving it. It isn't loud or demanding, it doesn't control or claim, it only says, I'm here beside you. For a man, that small space at the base of the back is where alertness meets trust. He may not realize it, but when a woman lets her hand rest there, even for a moment, his body answers before his thoughts can. Diane, 48, once shared a memory. She was walking with someone new, city traffic buzzing around them, the light was about to change. Without planning, she gently pressed her palm against the small of his back as they stepped forward, steadying him so they moved together. He paused for half a second. His shoulders softened, and when he looked at her it was with quiet recognition, like he hadn't felt that kind of care in years. That simple gesture told him more than words could. It wasn't about control, it was about trust. Men don't often put that into language, but their bodies reveal it. The way they stand straighter, the way their breathing calms, the way they lean closer. Touching his lower back says, you're not carrying it all, you're not alone right now. And that truth doesn't just ease him, it pulls him closer. Not because you are trying to impress, but because you are steady, present, unafraid to walk alongside him. That kind of quiet confidence doesn't come from reading tips in a book. It comes from living, from noticing, from trusting your own instincts as much as his. And when he senses that, he may not put it into words, but he feels safer, seen, and even wanted. Not in the noisy way the world brags about, but in a way that stays with him long after the touch is gone. The jawline is another place where men hide. They tense it when they want to resist reacting. They clench it when they are holding back emotions too heavy to reveal. It becomes a symbol of control, of strength, of keeping it together even when everything beneath the surface is breaking. That's why touching it softly without any force can be one of the most powerful things you'll ever do. Not because it makes him weaker, but because it tells him he doesn't have to keep that mask on anymore. Emily once shared a moment she said she would never forget. She and her husband had fallen into one of those old, tiring arguments, the kind that never truly resolves and just circles back again. Days went by, silence filled the air like a heavy fog between them. One night as he stood in the kitchen with his back to her, she walked up quietly and reached for him. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask him to speak. She simply laid her hand gently on his jaw, touching him like she remembered the man he was before the walls went up, before the distance, before life had pressed them down. He didn't say a single word, but his body did. His movement stopped. His shoulders eased. For a few seconds he closed his eyes, as if he was letting himself be known again. That's what the jaw holds, not just pride or control, but pressure. The pressure to never crack, to always stay unshakable. And sometimes all it takes is one quiet touch to release that weight. When you reach for him there, You're not asking for words or explanations, you're offering permission. For stillness, for softness, for connection that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. He might not react right away. He may look away, clear his throat, or stay silent. But deep inside, something unlocks, because in that simple gesture, you're telling him something few people ever say. I see you. I see even the parts you're trying to hide, and I'm not afraid of them. And that, more than anything, is what helps him breathe again. Not because he's lost his strength, but because for the first time in a long time, he doesn't have to prove it. The inner thigh is where desire often waits quietly. It's not a place people usually mention outside of intimacy, but it holds more than just physical reaction. It holds anticipation. And not every touch has to lead somewhere further. Sometimes the strongest connection is in the pause, in the lingering, in the silence stretched between two people. This kind of touch doesn't shout or demand. It's light, intentional, and it doesn't ask for more. It simply says, I remember this part of you. I still see you with the same eyes. Julie once told me about an evening that surprised her. She and her husband were just having a simple dinner, nothing fancy, just a quiet night together. They sat side by side on the couch, plates in their laps, something soft playing on the TV. As he leaned forward to grab his drink, she placed her hand gently on his inner thigh for only a moment. No words, no deeper meaning added, but the way he turned to her, the way his breath shifted, the way the energy in the room changed without a single thing being said, that moment stayed with her, not because it led anywhere, but because it didn't need to. That is the secret of desire. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits patiently. And when a woman touches a man with intention, but without expectation, she creates space for connection to simmer, for tension to breathe, for closeness to stretch, in the best way. It reminds him that he is wanted, not because of what might come next, but simply because she still chooses him, even in the middle of ordinary moments. That's how intimacy lives on, not through grand displays, but through the quiet ones, the gentle ones, the ones that pause instead of rushing. Just one brief touch, and both of them remember. The palm tells its own story. It's where he gives and receives, where he carries his responsibilities, where he reaches out to help, but it's also where he hides his weariness, his need to rest, his longing to be held without having to perform. There is something deeply human in holding a man's hand, not as a habit, not as a show, but as a quiet invitation, not to fix him, not to lead him, just to say, you don't have to fight right now. Natalie once shared a moment from a busy family gathering. The room was filled with laughter, noise and movement. Her partner stood across the room, distracted, holding a plate, half listening to everyone around him. She walked over, said nothing, and pressed her fingers gently into the center of his palm. That was all. No speech, no request for attention, just quiet presence. He looked at her as if the rest of the room disappeared. His shoulders relaxed. His hand slowly closed around hers, and in that small gesture, they had their own private moment. Silent and unforgettable. That is the power of the palm. It doesn't ask for affection, it waits for it. And when you touch it lightly, with care, you remind him he doesn't always have to stand tall. He is allowed to soften. He is allowed to feel. And when words fail, when timing feels wrong, when the world is just too loud, that single gesture is enough to bring everything back into focus. Just your hand in his, silently saying, I'm here, no need to explain. There is also a place just behind his ear, a spot few people ever reach, not because it's far, but because it's private and delicate. It connects directly to the body's calm, the vagus nerve, the place where stress softens, where emotions finally settle. Most people overlook it, but when you touch him there, slowly, softly, with care, his body remembers safety. You can't plan these moments. Maybe you're sitting close. Maybe the room is dim. Maybe your voice is low. You lean in. Your hand brushes behind his ear, and suddenly he stills. His eyes close. For just a second, his breath shifts. Not because of what you said, but because of where you reached. It isn't about seduction. It's about surrender. Behind the ear is where the whispers hide, the memories stay, the feelings that never found their way out linger. And when you reach for that space, not to demand, but simply to know, you touch a part of him very few have ever been allowed to see. That's where the power lies. No pressure, no words, just your fingertips and your steady presence, and it cuts through everything else. In that instant, he's no longer guarded. He isn't trying to impress or prove anything. He's simply there, with you fully. And that is what stays with him. Not the words, not the setting, but the deep memory of being touched in a place where his walls finally disappeared. Why do we so often chase big gestures when quiet presence speaks so much louder? We grow up thinking men want to be overwhelmed, that we must always be bold, magnetic, unforgettable. We try to spark something dramatic, something dazzling. But here's the truth most people realize too late. What truly undoes a man isn't the fire of seduction. It's the quiet realization that with you, he doesn't have to guard himself anymore. Desire doesn't grow deeper when he's dazzled, it grows when he feels safe. When the tightness in his shoulders fades, when he's not performing, not proving, not watching himself from the outside, but finally just breathing, present and free. It happens in those moments when you simply sit beside him, when you don't rush to fill the silence, when your hand rests lightly on his arm without asking for anything back. That's when he opens. That's when he leans closer. We often believe we need to make him want us, to spark something dramatic, but the real shift comes when he realizes he doesn't have to hold his breath around us anymore. That he can exhale, that he can be seen without being judged, that he can be gentle without being less of a man. And maybe that is the kind of intimacy that lasts far longer than fireworks. Not because it dazzles him, but because it calms him. So if you've ever wondered what truly makes a man stay, maybe the answer isn't found in doing more. Maybe it's in doing less, but with presence, with patience, with that quiet strength that says, you don't have to be anything else. You're already enough. Touch is never just skin against skin, not when it's real. When it's real, it reaches from soul to soul. A woman who is loved and lost, who has endured, doesn't need to learn how to be desirable. She is already magnetic in the way she listens, in the way she lingers, in the way she notices without needing to be noticed. All she has to do is remember. Remember how she touched before the world told her to be careful, before love came with conditions, before she stopped believing in softness. You don't need to try harder. Just touch like someone who knows the weight of presence. Have you ever touched someone and felt their breath change in that instant? Share that moment in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this touched something quiet inside you, send it to someone who might need to feel a little less alone tonight. Like, subscribe, and stay close, because there's more of this still to come. The truth is, intimacy doesn't always need big words or grand gestures. It lives in the smallest details, in the little pauses that most people overlook. It's the way you notice the weight in his shoulders before he says a word. It's the way your hand lingers for just a second longer, long enough to remind him he doesn't need to keep carrying it all alone. That's the kind of closeness that doesn't fade. Because bodies change, routines shift, life grows heavier, but the memory of being touched with real intention never leaves. Think about it, the moments you remember most in your own life aren't always the dramatic ones. Sometimes it's the quiet glance across a room, the warmth of a hand on your back when you were unsure, the way someone brushed your hair away from your face without saying anything at all. Those are the memories that last. And for him, it's no different. What reaches him isn't the loud display, but the gentle proof that he doesn't need to wear armor around you. That is why touch matters more with time, not less. A woman who has lived, who has survived heartbreak and kept going, who has found her way back to herself, carries something rare in her touch. It isn't rushed. It isn't desperate. It's patient, steady, knowing, and when she reaches for him, even in the smallest ways, his body feels the difference, even if he can't explain it. That's when his guard lowers. That's when connection grows. So maybe the secret isn't about learning new tricks, but about remembering. Remembering that you don't need to chase his attention or prove your worth. You only need to show up with the kind of presence that says, I see you, I'm here. You don't need to pretend. Because in the end, that's what stays with him long after words fade. The memory of being seen, touched, and accepted without conditions. It starts in ways that are almost invisible. In the pauses, in the silences, in the way you let him breathe without demanding anything in return. It's not about saying the right words or playing the right part. It's not about showing him how much you can do or how much you can give. It's about allowing space, a kind of space that makes him feel safe enough to lower his guard, safe enough to let the walls he has built around himself soften, even if only for a moment. So many people believe connection is about effort, about trying harder, about constantly proving. But often the deepest connections grow in the absence of trying, in those quiet moments when you are simply there. He doesn't fall for the words you carefully plan or the cleverness of what you say. He falls for the silence you make comfortable. He falls for the look in your eyes when he says nothing at all, and you still stay close. He falls when he realizes he doesn't need to perform for you. That's when the shift happens. It happens when you just sit beside him, when you don't rush to fill the silence with small talk, when your hand rests gently on his arm without needing anything in return. That is when he starts to lean in, when he opens without even realizing it. We often think we need to spark his desire, to push him toward wanting us, but the truth is the desire comes naturally when he feels he can finally exhale, that he can be seen without being judged, that he can be soft without being seen as weak. And maybe that is the kind of intimacy that lasts far longer than the excitement of fireworks. Not because it stuns him, but because it soothes him. So if you have ever wondered what makes a man stay, maybe the answer is not in doing more, but in doing less. Less effort, less forcing, less proving. Instead, it's in being present, being patient, showing that quiet strength that says, you don't need to be anything other than who you already are. You're already enough. That is what anchors him. Because touch is never only skin against skin. Not really. Not when it's real. When it's real, touch carries stories. It carries memory. It carries a weight far deeper than the body. It becomes soul to soul. A woman who has lived, who has lost, who has endured, doesn't need lessons on how to be desirable. She already carries desire in her presence. She becomes magnetic, not in what she tries to do, but in how she listens, in how she stays, in how she sees someone without needing to be seen herself. She doesn't perform, she simply remembers. She remembers what it felt like to touch, before the world told her to guard herself, before heartbreak made her question her softness, before love became tied to conditions and expectations. She remembers the girl she used to be, the one who believed in tenderness without fear. And when she remembers, she touches differently, not with calculation, but with truth. That truth is rare. That truth is what makes her unforgettable. You don't need to try harder. You don't need to prove more. You only need to touch, like someone who understands the weight of presence. Presence is the rarest gift you can give, because so few people know how to stay in a world obsessed with rushing. When you stay, when you hold, when you linger, you remind him of something his soul has been craving. Have you ever touched someone and felt their breath change in an instant, the way their body softened as though they had been waiting for that one gesture? Those moments are not accidents. They are proof of connection, proof of something wordless that passes between two people when the walls fall away.